Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Smarter Sourcing Podcast, Healthcare Supply Chain Edition, where we talk about healthcare supply chain issues across the industry and talk about it and think about innovation as well. Today, we're joined by Dan Hurry, the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Bon Secours Mercy Health and the President of Advantus Health Partners. Welcome, Dan.
Hey, thanks for having me, Eric. It's good to see you. Look forward to our time today.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here. And let's just get it kicked off. Thinking about you and the time that you've spent in the healthcare supply chain, 10 plus years in healthcare, a long career before that with supply chain roles. Tell me how you got here. How did you become the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Bon Secours Mercy Health?
Yeah, it was quite a journey here. And thanks for asking. Yeah, I'll give you the maybe 2-minute drill, if you will, here. Been in supply chain my whole career, and I've really had a blessed career to be across the board through food product development, brand management, category management, buying, logistics, distribution, and very big brands that you see in the consumer side every day. Some private label stuff over time as well you see the brands, it just you might not know who was making those goods. And then really when I was at Valero Energy in the supply chain side there and wholesale distribution side of the house, I actually had an interesting personal experience where I had got cancer and had a unique kind of read of what was happening in that world. Because I came from what I would say is a fairly sophisticated supply chain model and analytics and data and insights and all this stuff that we didn't even think twice about in the world I played in prior to healthcare. Then you have an interesting healthcare experience and nobody knows how to transmit data or give communication or lag times and reading lab reports or whatever it might have been. It struck me as very interesting. And I'm not a complainer. I'm not the type of guy that complains about things unless I will engage. And it became a calling for me to get into healthcare. So really what brings me here today is really an unfortunate experience that triggered some insight and a passion to make a difference in the healthcare supply chain, really with that one person in mind every time. Like, how do we make the experience a little better? I was quickly involved in a job as the VP of supply chain at Baptist Health System in San Antonio, Texas, which was a part of Vanguard, which was then acquired by Tenet, continued to advance in some opportunities there, and I was recruited to come to Bon Secours Mercy Health. Actually, at the time, it was Mercy Health, then became Bon Secours Mercy Health. So helped lead the integration process from a supply chain perspective of bringing those two orgs together, and then simultaneously kind of assess the marketplace, because it was a head scratcher to me coming in the industry that GPOs are it's just like ingrained in the industry, where the world I was in before that just wasn't a thing. You didn't really have a third party helping you in that regard. So really in understanding that, I thought, let's present to the board, maybe we should do that ourselves. Let's still act, let's align, let's do things similar, but why are we giving up value that we're really doing work for? That was the impression at the time. I've been blessed for the last, 4.5 years to run a dual hat, as you said, Chief Supply Chain Officer on one side and President of Advantus on the other. But everything that we do is really based on 100% what we do in Bon Secours Mercy Health. And if we can extend that value to others, we do. But generally speaking, it's an in-house operation.
Yeah, I always look at that and I go, wow, those seem like two full-time jobs. How do you balance your time between the two?
It is a delicate balance, to be honest, because internally, and rightfully so, leadership might say, hey, I just want you to be focused on the ministry. What are we doing here? And trying to convey that message that's always front and center and isn't always received. So it's more what I find in the dual hat. It's more of a political and communication challenge than it is an execution challenge, because we execute well on plans. We usually beat plans. And then on the flip side, you've got, commercially, how we extend things is there's such a heavy penetration of the large national GPOs that when you come to market with a somewhat unique offering where we say, we don't care about exclusivity. You don't have to do everything with us. If we can bring you value, tap into those things, and we'll grow together. Let's see what it looks like. Honestly, we've had people look at us like, are you serious? Like, is that right? Like, you're not going to tell me I need to do everything under the sun? We're like, no, pick an agreement, pick an alignment. Because how we look at it is it's intentional that partners is part of the name, Advantus Health Partners. So those partners are not just naturally internally, but externally in the supplier side and vendor side, as well as the commercial client side, if you will. And how do we triangulate a value prop that rises the tide for all? Sounds overly simple, right, Eric? Like, gosh, that makes sense. Why would it's got to be easy? But the biggest challenge is, I would say, politics and communication and trying to almost share like, yeah, actually it is that straightforward and simple. But people have become accustomed to a historical design that has maybe some opportunities for improvement in it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it all wrapped all in that, right? Was a major merger, multi-state merger that you had to navigate. So
And this global supply chain disruption that we had too.
yeah, no, yeah, throw that into the mix. But and as a adult parent of two kids that are in the industry now, like thinking about your role at Valero, and I always say, now I feel like I'm in The Graduate with my kids, where Mr. McGuire pulls Benjamin Braddock aside and says, hey, I got one word for you, it's plastics. Seems like energy is the big word now, and it has kind of the same, I don't know, burning platform to get there so fast now. Do you see things in the energy industry? Has healthcare caught up at all to your experiences at Valero, way back?
I would say in both Valero and the retail side of the world, unfortunately, I'm going to say no, because I think we've had the challenge by not using universal language on products in this industry as the others are afforded that benefit. And ironically, Eric, I think those afforded that benefit don't even realize what a benefit it is. And what I mean by that is, like, everything that we would do from an intelligence gathering perspective, building strategy, deploying strategy, moving products from raw goods all the way through disposition, which would be, in a consumer's hand or whatever it might be. We just had such rich and high frequency real time data that we could track. And really, the name of the game in that world is how to take that data to try to modify behavior, if you will. So here's a generic example. If we could get people within 4 feet of display, or 4 feet of something that they can grab that they might not have been thinking of when they walked in a retail location, we knew what to do, how to do that, what level to put it at, and what to combo it with. It was all based on data. It was real-time data, and we gather that data as it happened. Is it working? Is it not working? It wasn't a retro look back to make future decisions. It was real time. Whereas the challenge I've seen in this industry is that because we don't have universal language, we can't make real-time or even proactive decisions on demand planning the way other industries do. And honestly, it's created other industries within our industry where it's norm in the health space to have, data cleanup companies, or item master cleanup companies. They're constantly just enriching your data, which again, in another world, because you had universal codes, didn't have to do it. And I mean, it was difficult. That's been the number one difference, I think, from a supply chain perspective. What drives performance from good to great, and we just try to do a ton of workaround.
Yeah, I keep hoping it's going to get better, and trying to get people to go, hey, what do you want to look like in 10 years? Start now. And it's, the leaders like you that are making some progress. And
Certainly make progress, but not at the pace or the speed by which others do.
yeah. So maybe, if you think about it, I'm going to take it personal. So think about your career, first job that you ever had, and worst job that you ever had. And they may be one and the same, but
That's interesting. So first job, I was actually a busboy and dishwasher in a restaurant in upstate New York, which ironically was fun. It was just a challenge. And if I think about it, Eric, that was probably my first entry into supply chain, because all I kept thinking about is the speed by which we could move things all the way through the system and get them back in the hands of people that needed it. I don't know about worst job. I will tell you worst time. Maybe it's more of a time, because I've always kind of enjoyed challenges or whatever the opportunity is that's in front of me. But most challenging time was definitely during the pandemic. And I think primarily because it was just, you didn't have time to rest. It was just an exhausting time and debilitating, because there were so many new market entries that were there for nothing more than gain. And I'm a capitalist. I get it. I understand that, but there's certain things that shouldn't have taken place that did, that disrupted the supply chain in an unhealthy way. That was disparaging. That was a tough period of time. It was just a tough period of time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you had a lot going on then at your two organizations as well. So maybe walk me through, how you got the internal support to develop Advantus Health Partners, and then I've got a follow on to that. But just interested in, that's a pretty large organization that you built, and how do you get internal support to go do something like that?
Yeah, if you think about the timing too, we had just come out of the merger and we were leaning into the pandemic hadn't started yet. So it was almost, I recall it was the December prior. So there's like little inches of it starting, but not to the point we saw that following spring, winter. Really, I'd love to say it was overcomplicated, Eric. There were some very intricate details within this, but the high level was to present to the board that within the landscape, the size and scale that we had, the complexity and alignment we had, the gap that we were given, we leaned into the admin fee equation and said, gosh, we're giving up this. It would cost us that to do this. And we think we can actually impact price in a better way than we experience in the national landscape. And we had a handful of different, I would say the big three, consulting agencies all opine on the model, the strategy, and what we were doing because we wanted to get their take. We didn't want to just have a look in the mirror for our answer. And everybody, none were definitively aligned 100%, but they were all in the direction you should go do this. It was just like, how should you go do that? Was more a question in the air. Then we leaned in and we stepped forward. I think what was interesting is some other dynamics in the marketplace took place. The pandemic started, things changed, and we went early actually in what our model was originally planned to be. Still unsure if that was good or bad because we weren't fully ready, but we stepped into it anyhow. But consensus was pretty quick, I would say, at the board too, and the way we approached it.
That's great. And then, I always say, in the way that an organization does things that there's 4 levels of mastery, doing it for yourself, being able to tell somebody in a presentation what you did, putting it in a document like a research document or a white paper that causes, another level of knowledge. But then fourth and by far the hardest, commercializing it, taking that capability and selling it and servicing it to somebody else. Are there any tips that you'd have or lessons that you have from your commercialization that you'd want to share with others?
Yeah, there's 2 things actually, and I left out a piece that I didn't think about till you just brought it up, Eric, on the credibility piece. I think the reason we got to the table to even talk about something like in Advantus was that we had a track record over a few years, how we integrated the merger and outpaced not only in value, but in time, and how we stood up and executed everything we did to advance the supply chain. So that really got us, to your point, credibility, got us to the table. And I think folks got comfortable with, we don't fully understand this, but you've proven you've done it before, so step into it perfectly. On the commercial side, to your question, like tips or advice, I would say don't try to be everything to everybody. Find your niche, find your value, and think broad, think of macro level. Does the industry really need another mass merchandiser in the GPO space, or does the industry need certain things? Like, we leaned in to say, and I still say this, and we're constantly pushing on this. There is a gap in complex operational purchase services models out there, and take it from all the way from hospitality to the local fish tank cleaning service, whatever it is, everything in between. We really don't have an advanced model in that space, or something that is saleable and scalable in a meaningful way along this. So I think advancing there, and then of course you got the hyper complex phase when you talk about implants. Like, how do you look at that? Everything in between those two, you kind of just want to be relevant, but there's no need for another player in that space. Where the gaps are, where the opportunities are, find those, lean into those, and be very good at it. Strive to be the best at it, but don't try to be everything to everybody. It's just, selling gloves or gowns from another person, that doesn't do anything for you.
Yeah, and when a dollar is a dollar, right? That big category, indirect spend is massive and has lots of complexity and hard to govern, at national level because it's so regional. To that extent, right? We talk as an industry, we talk a lot about collaboration. Kind of been ready. I wrote about that for 15 years, trying to help encourage it, and we have pockets of it. But you've been particularly good at it, finding partners, leaning into them. Tell me maybe a little bit more about how your mindset has shifted to a more collaborative model and some of the successes that you've had there with putting way more knowledge and fewer partners.
Yeah, let's say some of it was even to the earlier points of finding that niche or the gap in the market. Because generally speaking, the gap in the market is probably something that's a gap at home, if you will. And what we found, and especially in the services space, if you don't align with challenges, opportunities with the partner, and maybe share what might be, maybe it's even just, an aspiration that somebody might have, coupled with the problems, and have open book relationship to try to solve together, it's hard to be successful. So when we approach, our partners model, and it's a short list, really, it's primarily in the service space. We try to find the best of the best in the space, but then it doesn't stop with a contract or how we align it. It's literally a daily grind of perpetual continuous improvement with measures, KPIs, dashboards that we all align on and drive toward to turn the needle a little further. And I would even add to that, Eric, what we did was we tried to find benchmarks nationally in all of these spaces: dietary, EVS, med-surg distribution, HTM, et cetera, all courier services. What are the metrics that you can find nationally that are benchmarks? And unfortunately, there's very few and far between. So what we try to do is get a lot of people around the table and say, well, we're all smart. Well, let's open the, kind of the net a little wider. Let's talk to a bunch of people what they think is meaningful in this space. Let's start to measure those things so then we can share externally and just continue to build the model accordingly. It ends up being a benefit for the partners that we've got because now they can sell, quite honestly, a case study that's ongoing. And for us as well, when we did look at the commercial side to say, hey, here's our partnership. We'd love to extend this and bring it forward. But the other element that we look at, especially this goes back to like the national GPO landscape, we don't look for more than one partner in this space. Like we kind of lean into, this is our partner, this is what we do. We don't need to have a second, third, fourth, whatever it might be. We only want to line up with one because it would be ingenuine to expand it further.
Well, living in Issaquah, Washington, home of Costco, I think about that model, and I've heard you describe it as the Costco model, Kirkland brand, if you will. They usually don't have, almost always don't have multiple brands under the Kirkland. It's like, hey, we picked our partner that works, kind of that's where we go. So, I commend it. It's a refreshing, at that world.
And if I could drill on there, because we do use that Costco analogy, I think the consumer genuinely goes into a Costco, whether it's they're buying something that's got the Kirkland brand or whatever brand it might be on, you buy that with confidence that they did all the QC checks on whatever that is. You're not buying a subpar product at a lower price. They've leveraged the size and scale of who they are to bring forward a quality good at a good value, right? So I think that's kind of how we view it as well.
Yeah, but that vetting process involves the CEO. Every product that gets that Kirkland brand is vetted. Well, maybe let's talk about, you've been chief supply chain officer now for a while. What's changed in the last 10 years? What's the major change that's occurred that's changed that job?
So it's interesting here. When I first came into the industry, another eye-opener for me was in this industry, how deflated I saw the lead supply chain role or supply chain role period at any level was viewed, handled, managed, and perceived. Another passion I had coming into that, like how do we elevate the supply chain? And you got to do it through credibility and results, but how do you also get a seat at the table and start to nudge into strategy and some other things in a healthy way, not just be a box kicker or materials management person or whatever it might be. And here we sit here today, and I really haven't been in the industry that long. And it's hard to look at an IDN at least and not see a chief supply chain officer role or a vice president of supply chain, senior vice president of supply chain. I still think, there's opportunities for improvement. Some have done it very well if they sit in those roles to align with the C-suite, and others seem to really elevate through results and credibility what the importance was within the supply chain. And I think I've seen some roller coaster a little bit. I think what really put a stamp on it was during the pandemic, when I think it was an eye-opening reality of the complexities within the supply chain and the fragility of the supply chain that comes with it. So I think folks were starting to elevate, but honestly, in the last 18 months, it seems like I've seen things recede a little bit and not as much support or push. And of course, I've seen a handful of folks turn over as well in some of these seats, whether it's retirement or just moving on to other opportunities. But one thing for sure, there's kind of this continuous quest to define what are measures of success in this space and what does it look like and how do we apply such pressure in a healthy way collectively to an organization of supply chain as a discipline, not necessarily just a role.
It's been crazy. I mean, I predicted a while back that we'd be at 50% of the lead roles as chief supply chain officer. And this year, I think it's the financial pressures and it's the turnover, it's just driven it back. Roles are getting downgraded, losing their jobs. And so much of this job is like, I would call it CPO supply chain. Like, you've got to be a good operator, but you've also got to be able to sell up in the organization. Somehow, it just in some pockets, that's kind of gotten lost and tricky. CFOs, particularly when they come in, it's a high risk endeavor. It's almost like there's a little manual of when your CFO changes, if you report to the CFO, here's how you need to think about it. With those cost pressures, and you're not immune to those, I wouldn't think. Is there anything else that you're thinking about that's changing things in the short term, or are you able to stay long-term focused on what you're doing without, having to jump through hoops on the short-term side that make you do things that you might not normally focus on?
I would say, well, it's always been in the hopper to do these things, such as utilization and how do we look at consumption at point of use, whether it's in a surgery, cath lab, even in a nursing station, whatever it might be. Trying to lean in with a lot more effort toward what is utilization, how do we manage utilization, what's appropriate, and how do we share insights across the whole enterprise, across the whole ministry, to see if there's opportunities within that space. So more there, while not taking a finger off of assuring we've got pricing that benchmarks at the highest level within the strategy that we have. Because, there can be sometimes confusion in benchmarking as well. And I'll use a generic example, Eric. If somebody's a sole source provider with a total joint company, you're generally going to have a good price compared to an all-play model, right? No surprise, we all know that. But to your point earlier, being able to communicate and assure that everybody understands that price you might see comes with some qualifications, if you will. Like, you need to align to get that. That's where the challenges or the opportunities as leaders really comes into play. So to your point, a lot more in utilization, because we think, nothing's ever complete, but fundamentals are fairly sound. And now trying to take it up, yet another notch of utilization and how to handle things there.
Yeah, price only a piece of the equation, valuing service, right? All these things that you've been working on. And maybe we shift to some people, because you've had an interesting people strategy there. I'm just wondering, how do you balance this, right? Supply chain's about people, and we will just advocate leaders hire good people, and have succession plans in place. I look at what you've done, right? High profile leaders like Dr. Jimmy Chung on the clinical side, John Wright, chief supply chain officer at a couple organizations, your COO. How do you look at that? How are you able to, sell that internally to get those high profile people into your organization? And how's it working, working with them? Working the most model?
Yeah, I still scratch my head how I've been able to be blessed with such great leaders that surround me. But I will tell you, someone who was shared vision, as simple as that. Eric, again, I tend to lean into the oversimplified parts of this. And years ago, when we were talking about putting this together and being a little different than norm and driving a value prop in the industry and internally to be thought leaders and make a change, people really leaned in and said, yeah, that's where I'm at in my career. And yeah, I would love to be part of what we're putting together. And my biggest challenge is trying to lead such strong leaders as they are and trying to afford them the room to just do what they're doing. And I can act as a campaign manager. I always going to use that term. I'm going to campaign for you and try to make sure that we can get things done. I would say just, and all of them come with a certain humility and selfless nature that they really want to do more for the industry. I think we're all 100% aligned there. And how and where we do it, we just continue to push for, what's the ideal answer.
You talk about the industry, right? So there's Bon Secours Mercy Health and Advantus Health Partners, and then there's the impact on the industry. You had a number of leaders that left your organization and now running their own shops. How do you cultivate leaders that are capable to go out to other and lead other health systems? And how do you feel about that? In your role in the industry.
Yeah, so I love it. There's in 5 other systems right now. There's chief supply chain officers there. We're in our org. Nothing, sitting at the top. There's nothing that makes me prouder than to see that. And we are very intentional, have been for years. And honestly, my model, even prior to here at Tenet and Vanguard, to develop younger leaders through MBA, resident programs, internships, and continue to try to advance people. We have a whole curriculum that we developed with Miami University's supply chain school, really to just continue to develop leaders and even folks that want to aspire to become a leader. I think it's awesome. If you really think about it again at that macro level and say, hey, we want to elevate the industry, but you got to do it through other people. It won't all be in-house. Now, certainly we would rather all those folks love to stay here and they'd stay at a role that, maybe is underneath their potential, but I'd rather see people go hit their potential, bring it elsewhere. And literally with all of them, we talk at least once a month. We're sharing ideas or thoughts, or we love it. I love it. It's a proud moment to see those folks continue to thrive. And, I'm sure there's others sitting in our org right now that will become leaders not too far down the road at other organizations. And that's okay. That's a good thing.
Disruptive in the short term, but long term, good stuff. And particularly for organizations that are built, to adapt, it works really well. So on the technology front, I've kind of posited in a few places that we should be leaning more into technology development, AI. What's your state of the state there? How are you thinking about those investments and the future of supply chain on that front?
Constantly trying to explore what is the best model, the tools. But I think within the space, because it's continuously evolving, is that you kind of got to step into something and evolve with it, not wait for the evolution and then step in. So, we've worked strongly with SupplyCopia and a CQO tool to back that utilization tool of triangulating between EMR data and ERP data and everything that comes with it to have some meaningful outputs to take action on. That will continue to evolve. There's now an AI element that comes with it where you can have, kind of speed to insights and move things a little faster. I think, again, within the industry, while we're calling some things, as it relates to supply chain, some we're calling AI are things that have been deployed 2 decades ago in other industry. Even when we look at camera technology and other things, like what that looks like, good stuff. It absolutely is. but it's not necessarily pushing the envelope on innovation or AI. It's just it's another automation system that is helpful, but I think it's still the ROI is still got to be figured out. And it's what at a macro level, trying to explore, trying to understand it, trying to find the right fit for what we do.
Let's call it kind of making some bets, in the health and shape, which is it's what you're in kind. Well, Dan, this has been great. Really appreciate your time. You're an industry icon and legend. You've done great work. Lots of respect for what you've done. Any parting thoughts from you before we say goodbye to our listeners?
First, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate everything you've done for the industry. Talk about an icon, he's a opposite of on the screen with me. So thanks for all you do, Eric. I would say to, my colleagues out there, which all of them are doing this, it's about just continuous improvement, managing the grind. And then the more we can all collaborate and share ideas and then step forward together, I think the better off we're going to make this industry and the better off if that return comes back home. So thanks to all my colleagues that are watching and listening, and certainly open to any individual questions somebody wants to reach out. Happy to have that dialogue. So thanks, Eric.
Well, thanks, Dane. You're always generous and with your time and your words. And with that, we'll close this out. This has been Smarter Sourcing Healthcare Supply Chain Edition with Dan Hurd, the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Bon Secours Mercy Health and President of Advantus Health Partners. Thanks, and thanks to all of you for listening, and have a great day.